Tonight, we explore one of the most liberating teachings in Zen Buddhism, the teaching of non-attachment. This truth sits at the heart of freedom, showing us how to engage completely with life while holding everything with open hands. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Non-attachment is not about caring less. It is not about becoming cold or distant. It is about engaging fully with each moment while releasing our grip on how we think things should be. Just listen to these ancient stories and allow this wisdom to settle into you like nourishing rain soaking into earth. Relax. Notice your breathing, which continues on its own without any effort from you. Let's begin this gentle journey together. There is something we do that creates most of our suffering. We take the people we care about and we try to hold them in place. We take our plans and expectations and we demand that reality match them exactly. We take our possessions, our roles, our identities, our opinions, and we grip them so tightly that our hands ache from the holding. This gripping feels necessary. We think if we hold loosely, we will lose everything. We believe that caring means clinging, that loving means grasping, that if we open our hands, everything precious will slip away. So we hold tighter and tighter, thinking this will keep us safe. But the opposite is true. The tighter we hold, the more we suffer. The harder we grasp, the more pain we create. Not because the things we love are painful, but because our grasping itself hurts us. Like holding sand, the tighter we squeeze, the more slips through our fingers. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering. Not love, not care, not connection, but attachment. The demanding that things be permanent when they are not permanent. The insisting that people stay exactly as they are when people are always changing. The refusing to accept life as it actually unfolds. Non-attachment does not mean we stop caring. It means we stop trying to control. We can love deeply without possessing. We can value something without clutching it. We can hope for outcomes without demanding them. We can hold everything we treasure with open hands, appreciating what is here while it is here, releasing what passes when it passes. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived a potter named Suki who worked in a small workshop at the edge of a mountain village. She had learned her craft from her mother, who had learned from her mother before that. For 20 years, Suki had been making bowls, cups, and plates that people throughout the region used in their daily lives. Suki loved her work. She loved the feel of clay between her hands, the way it responded to pressure and moisture. She loved the transformation that happened in the kiln, how soft, wet earth became hard and permanent. She loved knowing that the things she made would be used by families, would hold food, would be passed from hand to hand at meals shared together. But something had begun to trouble Suki deeply. She would spend days making a bowl, carefully shaping it, attending to every curve and line. She would glaze it with colors she had mixed herself, fire it at exactly the right temperature, polish it until the surface gleamed. When it was finished, it would be beautiful, perfect in her eyes. Then someone would come to purchase the bowl. They would pick it up, examine it briefly, and say something like, "This is nice. How much?" Or they would haggle over the price, suggesting the bowl was not worth what she was asking. Or they would buy it and carry it away without seeming to appreciate the work that had gone into making it. Each time this happened, Suki felt a pain in her chest. She had poured herself into these pieces. She had given them her skill, her time, her attention, and people treated them as ordinary objects, useful things to buy and use and eventually break or replace. They did not see what she saw. They did not value what she valued. She began to resent her customers. When someone would pick up a bowl she had labored over and ask casually about the price, she would feel anger rising. Did they not understand what they were holding? Could they not see the care that had gone into it? She would answer curtly, sometimes refusing to sell if she felt the person did not appreciate the piece properly. Her workshop began to fill with finished pottery that she would not sell. She could not bear to let these pieces go to people who would not treasure them as she did. Better to keep them herself than to watch them be treated carelessly. But this meant she had less income, and her workspace became crowded with objects she had made but could not release. One day, an elderly monk named Rosan came to the village. He was known as a teacher of some wisdom, and people invited him to speak at the small temple. Suki did not usually attend such gatherings, but something drew her there that evening. Rosan spoke about attachment, about how we create suffering by demanding that things be a certain way, about how we can care deeply about our work without grasping at how others receive it, about holding life with open hands. After he spoke, Suki approached him. She felt embarrassed, but also desperate. "I make pottery," she said, "and I suffer every time someone does not appreciate what I make. How can I stop suffering without caring less about my work?" Rosan looked at her with kind attention. "Why do you make pottery?" he asked. "Because I love it," Suki said. "Because the making itself brings me joy. Because I want to create beautiful, useful things." "And does the making bring you joy?" Rosan asked. Suki thought about this. "Yes," she admitted. "When I am shaping the clay, when I am focused on the work itself, I feel completely content. It is only afterward, when I think about how others will receive it, that I suffer." "Then your suffering comes not from the making, but from your attachment to how others should respond," Rosan said gently. "You make a bowl. This is complete. The bowl exists. Your work is done. But then you demand that others see the bowl exactly as you see it. Value it exactly as you value it. Appreciate it exactly as you think they should. This demand is what creates your pain." Suki felt these words land somewhere deep. "But I care about the work," she protested. "If I stop caring how people receive it, am I not abandoning my craft?" "There is a difference between caring and grasping," Rosan said. "You can care deeply about making each bowl as well as you possibly can. This is good. This is devotion. But once you have made the bowl, once you have given it your best, you can release it. Let it go into the world. Let people receive it however they receive it. The bowl's purpose is not to prove your worth or to force others to see things your way. The bowl's purpose is to be a bowl, to be used, to serve." He paused, then added, "When you grasp at how others should respond, you are no longer serving your craft. You are serving your own need for validation, your own need to control how you are seen. This is attachment, and attachment always creates suffering." Suki thanked the monk and walked home slowly, His words stayed with her, turning over in her mind. That night, she could not sleep. She sat in her workshop surrounded by all the pieces she had refused to sell. In the dim lamplight, they looked beautiful, but they also looked trapped. She had imprisoned them with her grasping. The next morning, Suki made a decision. She would sell the pottery she had been hoarding, not because she no longer cared about the pieces, but because holding on to them was not honoring them. They were meant to be used, not kept as proof of her skill. She opened her workshop and let people come. When someone picked up a bowl and asked the price without commenting on its beauty, Suki felt the familiar pain begin. But this time, she noticed the pain. She recognized it as attachment, as her demand that this person should respond a certain way. She took a breath and simply named a fair price. When the person paid and walked away with the bowl, Suki practiced releasing. The bowl was going to its purpose: to be used, to hold food, to be part of someone's daily life. How they valued it was not something she could control. Her work was to make it well. Their experience of it was their own. This practice was not easy. Each time someone treated her work casually, she felt the urge to grasp, to demand, to insist they see what she saw. But each time she would notice the urge and choose differently. She would remember that her joy was in the making. That once the piece was made, it belonged to the world, not to her expectations of how the world should receive it. Over weeks and months, something shifted. Suki still cared deeply about her work. She still gave each piece her full attention and skill. But she no longer suffered when people did not respond the way she wanted. She could appreciate a piece she had made and also let it go. She could value her craft without needing others to validate that value in specific ways. One day, a customer bought several bowls without much comment. In the past, this would have pained Suki. But now, she felt only a quiet satisfaction. She had made the bowls well. They would serve their purpose. This was enough. The customer returned a week later. "I wanted to tell you," the woman said, "these bowls have changed how my family eats meals together. There is something about them that makes us slow down, pay attention. I do not know what you put into them, but they carry something special." Suki felt warmth at these words. But she noticed something important. The warmth was a gift, but she did not need it. She had already released these bowls. The woman's appreciation was lovely, but Suki's peace did not depend on it. This was freedom. "Thank you for telling me," Suki said simply. "I'm glad they serve you well." After the woman left, Suki sat in her quiet workshop. She understood now what Roseanne had tried to teach her. Caring deeply about her work did not require grasping at how others received it. She could give her best to each piece and then open her hands. Let it go. Release it to whatever purpose it would serve, whatever appreciation or lack of appreciation it would receive. This was not caring less. This was caring more purely, without the burden of needing to control outcomes, without the suffering that came from demanding reality match her expectations. She was free to love her work without being imprisoned by it. The teaching of non-attachment does not ask us to stop caring. It asks us to stop grasping, to stop demanding that the world match our ideas of how it should be, to stop trying to control things that are beyond our control. Suki cared about her pottery, but she had been attached to how people responded to it. She had been grasping at validation, at recognition, at having others see things exactly as she saw them. This grasping created suffering that had nothing to do with the pottery itself. The pottery was fine. The making was joyful. The suffering came entirely from her attachment to specific outcomes. When we confuse caring with grasping, we create unnecessary pain. We think we have to hold tightly to prove we love something. We think we have to control outcomes to show we are devoted. But the opposite is true. Real care, real devotion can hold things lightly, can give our best and then release the results, can love without possessing. This applies to everything in our lives. We can care about our work without being attached to praise or recognition. We can care about our relationships without grasping at how people should behave. We can care about outcomes without demanding that things unfold exactly as we planned. The caring remains. The grasping falls away. And in that falling away, we find freedom. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle. In a village near the sea, there lived a fisherman named Toru who owned a set of nets that had belonged to his father. These nets were very well made. His father had woven them by hand over many months, using techniques passed down through generations. The nets were strong, carefully knotted, designed to catch fish efficiently without tearing. Toru treasured these nets, not just because they were useful for his work, but because they connected him to his father, who had died several years earlier. When Toru used the nets, he felt his father's presence. He would remember watching his father weave them, learning the patterns, understanding the craft. The nets were more than tools. They were inheritance, memory, connection. Toru took excellent care of the nets. He would dry them properly after each use. He would inspect them for any weak spots and repair them immediately. He would store them carefully, protected from sun and salt that might damage them. His life as a fisherman revolved around these nets. One autumn, a great storm came suddenly. The sky darkened in late afternoon, and wind began to howl. Toru rushed to the shore where his small boat was anchored. He needed to secure everything before the storm hit fully. He worked quickly, but the wind was already fierce. Waves were rising, crashing against the rocks. As Toru tried to pull his nets into the boat, a huge wave struck. The boat lurched violently. The nets, which Toru was holding, were torn from his grasp by the force of the water. He watched in horror as they were pulled away by the current, tangled with debris, swept out into the churning sea. He stood at the edge of the water, breathing hard, his heart pounding. The nets were gone. His father's nets. The tools of his livelihood. The connection to his past. Gone in an instant. His first response was rage. He wanted to blame someone. The weather. The gods. Himself for not acting sooner. Then came despair. How would he fish without nets? How would he survive? And beneath the practical worry was a deeper grief. He had lost something irreplaceable. Something that carried his father's hands, his father's knowledge, his father's presence. For days after the storm, Toru could not bring himself to return to the sea. He sat in his house, feeling the weight of the loss. Other fishermen offered to lend him nets, but he refused. They were not his father's nets. They would not be the same. An old woman named Yuki, who lived near Toru and had known his father well, came to visit. She found Toru sitting in the dark, staring at nothing. "The storm took my nets," Toru said flatly when she asked what troubled him. "Yes," Yuki said. "I heard. Your father's nets?" "They are gone," Toru said. "Everything he put into making them. All those hours of work, all that skill and care, swept away in a moment. It is unbearable." Yuki sat quietly for a while. Then she said, "Your father made those nets with great care. He gave them his skill and his time. But tell me, why did he make them?" "To catch fish," Toru said. "To provide for his family?" "Yes," Yuki agreed. "He made nets so he could fish. The nets were for fishing, not for keeping. They were tools, meant to be used. If they lasted a long time, that was good. If they wore out or were lost, he would make or acquire new ones. The nets were not the point. The fishing was the point. The providing for his family was the point." Toru felt irritation rising. "But these were special. They were his work. They connected me to him." "Did they?" Yuki asked gently. "Or did you connect yourself to your father by using the nets the way he would have used them? By fishing the way he taught you? The nets were just nets, Toru. Your father is not in the nets. Your father is in what he taught you, in the skills he passed to you, in the way you approach your work. These things cannot be lost in a storm." She paused, then continued. "You are suffering not because the nets are gone, but because you were attached to them in a way that went beyond their actual purpose. You made them into something they were not meant to be. Relics. Proof. A way to hold on to your father. But you cannot hold on to your father. He is gone. And trying to hold on to him through objects creates suffering." Toru wanted to argue, but he could not find words. He sat in silence, feeling Yuki's words settle into him. "Your father would not want you to stop fishing because his nets were lost," Yuki said. "He would want you to get new nets and return to the work. To use what he taught you. To continue what he began. This is how you honor him. Not by clinging to objects, but by living the way he taught you to live." After Yuki left, Toru sat alone with his grief. But something had shifted. He recognized that his suffering was not just about losing useful tools. It was about his attachment to those specific nets. His belief that they were the only right nets. His need to keep something physical of his father's. His grasping at permanence in the face of loss. The next day, Toru went to a net maker and commissioned new nets. They would not be exactly like his father's, but they would be good nets made with skill and care. As he waited for them to be made, Toru thought about what Yuki had said. His father had not been in the nets. His father was in the knowledge he had passed on, in the skills Toru carried, in the approach to work, to life, to the sea that Toru had learned by watching and listening. When the new nets were ready, Toru took them out to fish for the first time. As he cast them into the water, he felt his father's teachings guide his hands. The way to read the water, the way to feel the current, the way to know where fish were gathering. None of this had been in the old nets. It had always been in him. The new nets caught fish well. They served their purpose. and Toru realized that he had not lost what mattered. He had lost objects he had been grasping at. Objects he had burdened with meaning they were never meant to carry. Once he released his grip on the old nets, once he accepted their loss, he was free to continue his work, to honor his father in ways that were alive rather than frozen. Years later, when the new nets eventually wore out and needed replacing, Toru felt no grief. He understood now. Nets were tools. They served their purpose and then were replaced. What mattered was not the specific nets, but the fishing, the work, the knowledge that continued. He could care deeply about his tools without being attached to any particular set of them. He could honor his father's memory without trying to preserve it in objects. He could hold his inheritance lightly, using it rather than clutching it. Both Suki and Toru learned the same essential truth about non-attachment. Suki learned to care about her pottery without grasping at how others received it. Toru learned to honor his father without clinging to specific objects. Both discovered that real care does not require tight gripping. That love can hold lightly. That devotion can release. This is what the teaching of non-attachment offers us. Not a demand to stop caring, but an invitation to stop grasping. To notice the difference between caring and clinging, between loving and possessing, between valuing something and demanding it stay exactly as it is forever. When we grasp, when we attach, we create a tension that exhausts us. We are constantly defending what we have, fearing loss, demanding that reality match our preferences. This tension is its own form of suffering, separate from any actual loss. We suffer from the grasping itself. When we release our grip, when we practice non-attachment, we can still care deeply. We can still give our best. We can still value what we value. But we do it with open hands. We appreciate what is here while it is here. We do our work without demanding specific outcomes. We love without trying to possess. We hold our preferences lightly, able to adjust when life brings something different than we expected. This does not make us passive or indifferent. It makes us more responsive, more flexible, more free. We can engage fully with life without the exhausting burden of trying to control every outcome. We can care about things without making our peace dependent on them going a certain way. The teaching invites us to examine where we are grasping. Where are our hands clenched? What are we holding so tightly that we cannot feel anything else? What demands are we making of reality that reality cannot meet? Where is our attachment creating suffering that goes beyond the natural challenges of living? When we find these places, the practice is simple but not easy. Notice the grasping. Feel the clench. And then, gently, see if we can soften our grip just slightly. Not abandon what we care about, but hold it a little more lightly. Open the hand just a bit. Make room for reality to be what it actually is, rather than insisting it match our expectations perfectly. This is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from caring, but freedom in caring. The ability to give our best and then release the results. To love fully without demanding that love look a certain way forever. To engage completely with life while holding everything with open hands. Rest for a moment. Notice if you are holding tension anywhere in your body. See if you can soften just slightly. Let yourself be supported by what is beneath you. You do not have to hold yourself up. You can let go. Even just for this moment, you can release your grip and rest. We carry more than we need. Not just in our hands or on our backs, but in our homes, in our storage rooms, in the spaces we fill with things we cannot let go of. We keep objects we no longer use because we might need them someday. We hold on to gifts we never wanted because someone gave them to us. We preserve things that belong to people we loved because releasing them feels like releasing the person themselves. Each object we keep requires something from us. Space to store it, energy to maintain it, mental attention to remember it and decide what to do with it. And beneath all this practical burden is an emotional weight, the feeling that we should keep things. That letting go would be wasteful or disrespectful or somehow wrong. That we are what we own, and losing possessions means losing ourselves. But the things we own can end up owning us. When we cannot let go of objects, we become their servants rather than their users. We arrange our lives around storing and protecting things we do not actually need or use. We carry the weight of possessions that no longer serve any real purpose except to prove we are not the kind of person who lets things go. The teaching of non-attachment invites us to examine our relationship with objects. Not to own nothing, but to use what we need without grasping at it. To hold possessions lightly, appreciating them while we have them, releasing them when their purpose is complete. To understand that we are not diminished by having less. Often, we are freed by it. Here is a story about someone who learned this truth. There once lived a woman named Michi, whose grandmother had been a weaver of great skill. The grandmother had created beautiful cloth throughout her long life, working at a large wooden loom that had been in the family for generations. She had woven fabric for clothing, for bedding, for special occasions. Each piece was made with care and attention, dyed with colors she mixed herself, patterned with designs that carried meaning. When the grandmother died, she left everything to Michi. The loom. Hundreds of pieces of woven cloth, some made decades ago. Bags of wool and thread in every color. Tools for spinning and dyeing, pattern books filled with designs, an entire life's work of weaving passed down to her only granddaughter. Michi felt honored by this inheritance. Her grandmother had been important to her. As a child, she had spent countless hours in her grandmother's workshop, watching the shuttle pass back and forth, listening to the rhythm of the loom, learning about colors and patterns and the patience required to create something beautiful. But Michi was not a weaver herself. She had learned other skills, chosen a different path. She had no use for a loom or hundreds of pieces of cloth. Still, when her grandmother died, Michi could not imagine letting any of it go. It all felt precious. Each piece of cloth carried her grandmother's hands, her grandmother's vision, her grandmother's life. Michi transported everything to her own home. The loom took up most of one room. The cloth filled multiple chests and boxes. The tools and materials required shelves and storage. Michi's modest house became crowded, filled with her grandmother's possessions in addition to her own. At first, Michi told herself she would learn to weave. She would use the loom, continue her grandmother's work. But weeks passed, then months, and Michi did not weave. She was busy with her own work, her own life. The loom sat silent. The cloth remained in its boxes. Everything was preserved, but nothing was used. People would occasionally ask Michi if she had any of her grandmother's cloth they could purchase. Some remembered the beautiful pieces the old woman had made and wanted to own one. But Michi always said no. She could not sell her grandmother's work. It would feel like betrayal, like valuing money over memory, like letting go of her grandmother. Years passed. 5 years. 10 years. Michi's house remained crowded with her grandmother's possessions. She would sometimes open the boxes and look at the cloth, touching the fabric, remembering. But mostly, the inheritance just sat there, taking up space, gathering dust, waiting for a purpose that never came. Michi began to feel burdened by what she owned. She could not use her rooms freely because they were filled with storage. She could not have guests stay because there was no space. She felt guilty when she looked at the unused loom, knowing her grandmother would have wanted it used, not preserved like a museum piece. But she could not bring herself to change anything. To let anything go would feel like losing her grandmother all over again. One day, a young woman named Rina came to Michi's door. She had heard about the loom and the cloth. She was learning to weave and desperately wanted to study the work of Michi's grandmother, whose reputation had been known throughout the region. "Please," Rina said, "just let me look at the pieces. Let me see how she worked. I am trying to learn the old patterns, the traditional techniques, and everyone says your grandmother was a master." Michi hesitated. She did not like people looking at her grandmother's things. But something in Rina's sincere interest made her agree. She led the young woman into the crowded room where the loom stood and the boxes of cloth were stacked. As Rina carefully examined the pieces, her face showed wonder and respect. She would hold up a length of cloth and study the pattern. She would trace the weave with her fingers, understanding the technique. She would note the color combinations, the ways different threads created texture and depth. "This is extraordinary work," Rina said quietly. "Look at this piece." The way she varied the tension here to create this effect. "And this color, I have been trying to achieve this exact shade and cannot figure out how. Your grandmother was truly gifted." Michi felt warmth at hearing her grandmother praised, but she also felt something else. Sadness. All this beautiful work, all this skill and knowledge hidden away in boxes, appreciated by no one except Michi on the rare occasions she looked. Preserved but not honored. Kept but not celebrated. "Would you like to learn on this loom?" Michi heard herself ask. The words surprised her. She had not planned to say them. Rina's eyes went wide. "I could not." "It is too precious. It belongs to your family." "It is not being used," Michi said slowly, the realization forming as she spoke. "My grandmother made cloth that people used, wore, lived with. She did not make it to sit in boxes. She made it to be part of life. What I am doing, keeping everything locked away, this is not honoring her. This is burying her work." She looked at the silent loom, the stacked boxes. "I think my grandmother would be happier if someone was using her loom, learning from her work, continuing what she started. I have been holding on to everything so tightly because I thought that was how to keep her close. But maybe I have been doing the opposite. Maybe I have been imprisoning her memory instead of celebrating it." Over the following weeks, Michi and Rina sorted through the cloth together. Some pieces were given to people who had admired the grandmother's work. Some were donated to be used by families who needed them. Some were kept by Michi, a careful selection of pieces that truly meant the most to her. But the majority were released, sent out into the world to be used and appreciated. The loom was moved to Rina's workshop, where she used it to learn and practice. Michi would sometimes visit and watch her work. Seeing the loom active again, hearing the familiar sounds, watching cloth being created, this felt more like honoring her grandmother than keeping everything in silent storage ever had. The tools and materials were given to other weavers who could use them. The pattern books were donated to a craft school where students could learn traditional techniques. Slowly, Michi's house emptied. The rooms became usable again. The crowded feeling lifted. At first, Michi felt moments of panic. Had she made a mistake? Had she let go of too much? But these moments passed quickly, replaced by something unexpected. Relief. Freedom. The weight she had been carrying for 10 years was gone. She could breathe in her own home again. One day, Rina brought Michi a shawl she had woven on the old loom, using techniques she had learned from studying the grandmother's work. "I want you to have this," Rina said. "Your grandmother's knowledge helped me make it. In a way, it carries both of us." Michi wrapped the shawl around her shoulders. It was warm and beautiful. And it was new, alive, created just for her. She realized this was what her grandmother's legacy should be. Not objects frozen in time, but knowledge and skill passing forward. Not preservation, but continuation. "Thank you," Michi said. "You have shown me something important. I thought I was keeping my grandmother alive by keeping everything she made. But I was actually doing the opposite. I was treating her work like it was dead, like it needed to be preserved in a tomb. Now, because I let go, her work is alive again, being used, being learned from, growing into something new." She paused, touching the woven fabric. "I held onto everything because I was attached to objects. I thought the objects were my grandmother, but they were not. They were just things she made. What mattered was what she knew, what she could teach, what she passed forward. And by releasing my grip on the objects, I allowed that to continue." Michi's story shows us something essential about our relationship with possessions. She thought keeping everything meant honoring her grandmother. But preservation is not the same as honor. Holding is not the same as loving. She had confused the objects with the person, the things with the meaning. When we attach to possessions, we often do this. We think the object is what matters, but the object is just pointing to something else. A gift points to affection. An heirloom points to connection. A tool points to skill or purpose. When we grasp the object itself, we miss what it was actually meant to convey. This creates suffering in two ways. First, we burden ourselves with things we do not need or use, simply because we cannot let them go. Our homes fill up. Our spaces shrink. We spend energy managing, storing, protecting objects that serve no real purpose except to prove we are not the kind of person who releases things. Second, and more painful, we often dishonor what we claim to honor. Michi thought she was respecting her grandmother by keeping everything. But her grandmother had made cloth to be used, not stored. By keeping it all locked away, Michi was actually betraying the spirit of the work. The objects had become more important than their purpose. Non-attachment to possessions does not mean owning nothing. It means using what we need without grasping at it. Appreciating things while we have them without making our identity dependent on having them. Understanding that objects are meant to serve purposes, and when those purposes are complete, the objects can be released. This teaching applies to everything we own. We keep clothes we never wear because we spent money on them or because they remind us of certain times. We keep books we will never read again because we feel we should be the kind of person who owns many books. We keep gifts we never wanted because we feel obligated to the giver. We keep broken things because we might repair them someday. We keep everything, and the keeping weighs us down. What if we could hold our possessions the way Michi finally learned to hold her grandmother's legacy? Using what serves us. Releasing what does not. Allowing things to move on to where they can be useful rather than insisting they stay with us. Understanding that we are not diminished by having less. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle. In a trading town near a river, there lived a merchant named Kota who bought and sold goods. He was not wealthy, but he made a decent living by trading wisely. He would purchase items in one place and transport them to another place where they were more valuable. Fabric from the mountains, pottery from the coast, tools made by skilled craftspeople. He kept careful track of what he owned, what he owed, what was owed to him. Kota's approach to possessions was practical. He did not form attachments to the things he traded. A bolt of silk was valuable, yes, but its value was in selling it, not in keeping it. He would buy it, appreciate its quality, and then release it to a buyer without regret. This ability to hold things lightly made him a good merchant. He could recognize value without grasping at it. But there was one category of possessions that Kota struggled with: his personal belongings. The things that were not for trade but for his own use. Over the years, he had accumulated many possessions. Clothes he rarely wore but could not part with. Tools he no longer used but thought he might need someday. Objects people had given him that he felt obligated to keep. Books he had not opened in years but felt he should own. His house was full of these things. Not dramatically full, not crowded like Michi's house had been, but full in a way that created a subtle burden. He would look at his overflowing shelves and feel tired. He would open a cabinet to find something and have to move 6 other things first. He would think about traveling and realize he could not because he needed to be here to watch over his possessions. One spring, Kota's business took him on a longer journey than usual. He would be traveling for 3 months, visiting several distant towns to establish new trading relationships. This meant leaving his house and most of his possessions behind. As Kota prepared for the journey, he had to decide what to bring. He could only carry what fit in 2 bags. Everything else had to stay. This forced him to choose carefully. Which clothes did he actually need? Which tools? Which items were truly necessary? The process of paring down to 2 bags was surprisingly difficult. Every item he left behind felt important. What if he needed this particular shirt? What if this tool became necessary? What if he regretted not bringing this book? But the bags could only hold so much. He had to prioritize, to choose, to let go of carrying everything. Finally, Kota packed his 2 bags and set out. For the first few days of travel, he kept thinking about all the things he had left behind. He worried about them. He wondered if they were safe. He felt their absence. But as the journey continued, something shifted. Kota began to notice how light he felt, how simple his life had become. Each morning, he knew exactly what he owned because it all fit in 2 bags. Each evening, he could set up camp or find a room without worrying about managing many possessions. He was free to move, to change plans, to go where opportunities led. The things he had brought served their purposes well. The clothes he wore got dirty, and he washed them and wore them again. The tools he carried did their work. The few items he had chosen proved sufficient for everything he needed. All the things he had worried about leaving behind turned out to be unnecessary. Kota found himself talking to another traveler one evening, a woman named Sora, who had been traveling for many years. She also carried only 2 small bags. When Kota mentioned how surprisingly good it felt to own so little, Sora smiled with recognition. "Most of what we own, we do not need," she said. "We keep things to feel secure, to prove we are prepared for any situation, to show ourselves and others that we are successful or responsible or cultured. But the things become weights. They tie us to places. They require our attention and energy. They make us less free." She gestured to her small bags. "I have everything I need here. Clothes, tools, a few books I truly love and reread. When I want something new, I release something old to make room. I use what I have. I am not burdened by what I do not use." Kota thought about his house, full of possessions he rarely touched. "But how do you know what to keep and what to release?" he asked. "I ask myself honest questions," Sora said. "Do I use this? Does it serve a real purpose in my life? Does it bring me genuine joy or value? Or do I keep it out of obligation or fear or some idea of who I should be?" Most of the things we own fall into that second category. We keep them for reasons that have nothing to do with actual need or value. She paused, then added, "The question is not whether something is good or useful in general. The question is whether it serves you, specifically, in your actual life as you actually live it. Most things do not. But we keep them anyway, and they become a burden we do not even notice we are carrying until we set them down." Kota spent the rest of his journey thinking about this. He noticed how much easier it was to travel with less. How much simpler his decisions became when he was not managing many possessions. How much more present he could be for the people he met and the work he was doing when he was not divided between here and his concern about all his things back home. When Kota finally returned home 3 months later, he walked into his house and saw it with new eyes. All these possessions, shelves full of books he did not read, cabinets full of dishes he did not use, clothes he never wore, tools for projects he never started, objects he had kept for years without remembering why. He understood now what Sora had been teaching him. These things were not serving him. He was serving them, storing them, protecting them, working to maintain the house that held them, unable to travel freely because someone needed to watch them. He had thought ownership meant security, but it had created a prison. Over the following weeks, Kota went through his possessions with the same ruthless clarity he used in his trading. Does this serve me? Do I use it? Does it bring genuine value to my life? For each item, an honest answer. And for most items, the honest answer was no. He released things steadily, not carelessly, but deliberately. Some items he sold. Some he gave to people who could use them. Some he donated to those in need. He kept only what he actually used or truly valued. The rest he let go. His house slowly emptied. The crowded shelves became spacious. The overflowing cabinets showed room. He could find what he needed easily because there was less to search through. He could clean quickly because there was less to move and dust. He felt lighter, as if he had been carrying a physical weight that had now been set down. Friends would visit and comment on how empty his house looked. Some asked if he was moving. But Kota did not feel the emptiness as lack. He felt it as space, as freedom, as breath. I used to think having more meant being more secure, Kota told one friend. But on my journey, I discovered the opposite. Having less made me more secure. I knew exactly what I had. I could manage it easily. I was free to move, to change, to respond to opportunities. Now I bring that same approach home. I keep what serves me. I release what does not. And I am more free than I have ever been. Years later, Kota's business required him to take another long journey. This time, preparing was simple. His life already fit into 2 bags because he had released his attachment to owning more. He could leave without worry because there was little to worry about. He could travel freely because he was not weighed down. When people asked Kota for advice about possessions, he would say, "The question is not how much can you afford to own. The question is, how much can you afford to carry? Everything you own requires something from you. Space, energy, attention, maintenance. Before you keep something, ask if what it gives you is worth what it costs you. Usually, the answer is no." Both Michi and Kota discovered the same truth about possessions. Michi learned that keeping everything dishonors what we claim to honor. Kota learned that owning less can mean having more freedom. Both found that attachment to possessions creates burdens we often do not recognize until we release them. The teaching of non-attachment does not tell us to own nothing. It invites us to examine honestly what we own and why we own it. To notice the difference between using something and being used by it. To recognize when possessions serve us and when we serve them. Most of what we own falls into the second category. We keep things out of obligation. Out of someday thinking, out of fear that not having them would mean something bad about us. Out of guilt about money spent or gifts received. We keep things because we think we should, not because they actually serve our lives. This creates a burden that is both practical and emotional. Practically, possessions require space, maintenance, management. Emotionally, they tie us down. They make us less free to move, to change, to respond to life's invitations. They create worry about loss or damage. They demand our attention and energy. When we release attachment to possessions, we do not become poor. We become free. Free to use what we need without grasping at it. Free to appreciate things while we have them without demanding they stay forever. Free to release what no longer serves us without guilt or fear. The practice is simple. Look at what you own. Ask honest questions. Do I use this? Does it serve a real purpose in my actual life? Does it bring me genuine joy or value? Or do I keep it for other reasons? Reasons that have more to do with fear or obligation or ideas about who I should be than with my real needs? For most things, when we are honest, the answer is clear. We do not use them. They do not serve us. We keep them anyway, and they become weights we carry without realizing how heavy they are until we set them down. Non-attachment to possessions is not about deprivation. It is about freedom. The freedom to live lightly. To move easily. To focus on what matters without the constant background burden of managing what does not matter. To use things well without letting them use us. This teaching liberates us from the weight we have been carrying. Not by making us own nothing, but by helping us own consciously. Keeping what serves us. Releasing what does not. The Buddha taught that one of our deepest attachments is to the idea of a fixed self. We create stories about who we are and then cling to those stories as if they were permanent truth. I am a teacher. I am a mother. I am successful. I am wise. I am strong. We build identities around these roles and qualities, and then we suffer when anything threatens them. In Zen Buddhism, there is a teaching about no self. This does not mean we do not exist. It means the self we think we are, this fixed permanent identity, is actually fluid and constructed. We are not one unchanging thing. We are a process, constantly becoming, shaped by conditions and experiences. But we grasp at the idea of a solid self and defend it against anything that suggests it might not be true. This attachment to identity creates suffering in subtle but powerful ways. We feel we must maintain our self-image at all costs. If we see ourselves as competent, we cannot admit mistakes. If we see ourselves as kind, we cannot acknowledge our occasional cruelty. If we see ourselves as wise, we cannot say we do not know. We become prisoners of our own stories about who we are. And when life brings situations that contradict our self-image, we suffer deeply. Not just from the situation itself, but from the threat it poses to our identity. The successful person who fails feels their entire sense of self crumbling. The strong person who becomes weak feels they have lost who they are. The wise person who makes a foolish choice suffers not just from the consequences, but from the blow to their carefully maintained identity. Zen practice invites us to hold our sense of self more lightly. To notice that who we are is not fixed. To see that we can function, can live, can relate to others without defending a rigid self-image. To discover that there is freedom in not knowing exactly who we are, in being open to becoming something we have not yet imagined. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived a scholar named Chiyo who taught philosophy and literature at a respected academy. She had studied for many years, earned recognition for her knowledge, and built a reputation as someone who understood difficult texts and could explain complex ideas with clarity. Her students admired her. Her colleagues respected her. She was known throughout the region as a person of great learning and wisdom. Chiyo's identity was built around being knowledgeable, being the one with answers, being wise. She had worked hard to earn this identity, spending years in study and contemplation. It was not just what she did. It was who she was. A scholar, a teacher, someone who understood things that others found confusing. This identity gave Chio a sense of security and worth. When students came to her with questions, she could usually provide answers. When colleagues discussed difficult topics, she could contribute meaningful insights. Her knowledge was her foundation, her value, her sense of self. One day, a new teacher arrived at the academy. His name was Daigo, and he had traveled widely, studying different traditions and philosophies. He was friendly and humble, never claiming great expertise. But in casual conversations, he would sometimes mention ideas that Chio had never encountered. Perspectives from distant regions. Interpretations of texts that differed from what she had learned. At first, Chio felt intrigued by these new ideas. But gradually, she began to feel something else. Uncertainty. There were things Daigo knew that she did not know. Ways of thinking she had never considered. Her knowledge, which had seemed comprehensive, now appeared limited. This feeling unsettled Chio deeply. She had built her entire identity on being knowledgeable, on being wise, on understanding what others did not understand. But here was someone who knew different things, who could speak about subjects she had never studied. This should have been interesting, even exciting. Instead, it felt threatening. One afternoon, during a gathering of teachers, a student asked a question about a particular philosophical text. It was a complex question, touching on interpretations of meaning and translation issues. Chio prepared to answer, as she usually did. But before she could speak, Daigo offered a response. He explained several different ways the passage could be understood, depending on which scholarly tradition one followed. His answer was thoughtful and nuanced, acknowledging complexity rather than claiming one right interpretation. The student thanked Daigo and seemed satisfied. The conversation moved on. But Chio sat in silence, feeling something she had rarely felt before. She did not know all the interpretations Daigo had mentioned. She could not have given that answer. There was a question in her field of supposed expertise that she could not answer as fully as this newcomer had answered it. Later that day, Chio realized she was avoiding Daigo. She did not want to talk with him, did not want to encounter more evidence of the gaps in her knowledge. She felt angry at him, though he had done nothing wrong. She felt embarrassed, though no one had criticized her. She felt her sense of self trembling, threatened by the simple fact that someone knew things she did not know. A few days later, during a formal lecture, a student asked Chio a direct question about a text from a tradition she had not deeply studied. In the past, Chio might have admitted this gracefully. But now, feeling defensive about her identity as the knowledgeable one, she attempted to answer anyway. She drew on what little she knew and tried to sound authoritative. But her answer was vague and incomplete. She could feel herself reaching beyond her actual knowledge, trying to maintain an image of comprehensive wisdom. The student looked confused. Daigo, who was attending the lecture, said nothing, but Chio imagined she saw pity in his eyes. After the lecture, Chio returned to her room and sat in silence. She felt miserable. She had embarrassed herself trying to pretend she knew more than she did. And beneath the embarrassment was something deeper and more painful. The recognition that her sense of self was fragile, dependent on always being the wise one, the one with answers, the one who knew. That evening, Chio went to the academy's small meditation hall. She rarely came here, preferring intellectual study to sitting practice. But tonight, she felt a need for quiet. She sat on a cushion and tried to settle her agitated mind. An old monk named Tessai was also in the hall, sitting in silent meditation. When Chiyo stood to leave, he spoke to her quietly. "You seem troubled." Chiyo hesitated, then found herself speaking honestly. "I have built my life around being knowledgeable, but I have discovered there are things I do not know, and this discovery feels like losing myself." Tessai nodded slowly. This is the suffering that comes from attachment to identity. You have created a story that you are the wise one, the knowledgeable one. And now reality is showing you that this story is incomplete. You are suffering not because you lack knowledge, but because you are attached to seeing yourself a certain way. "But I am a scholar," Chiyo protested. "That is not just a story. That is what I do, who I am." "Is it who you are?" Tessai asked gently. "Or is it a role you play, a function you serve, one aspect of a much larger reality that you cannot capture in any simple identity?" He paused, then continued. "In Zen, we practice seeing through the illusion of a fixed self. You are not one unchanging thing called a scholar. You are a living process, constantly changing, containing multitudes. Some knowledge, yes, but also ignorance. Some wisdom, yes, but also foolishness. Some understanding, yes, but also confusion. When you insist on being only the wise one, only the knowledgeable one, you cut yourself off from the full reality of being human." Chiyo felt tears forming. "But if I am not the wise one, who am I? What am I worth?" "You are worth exactly what you are worth without any identity," Tessai said. "Your value does not come from playing a role perfectly. It comes from being alive, being present, being willing to grow and change and discover." The most honest thing you could have said to that student was, "I do not know." This would not have diminished you. It would have shown your humanity, your willingness to acknowledge limits, your freedom from needing to maintain a perfect image. He smiled kindly. The scholar who can say, "I do not know," is wiser than the scholar who pretends to know everything. Because she understands that knowledge is endless and humility is essential. She is not attached to appearing wise. She is interested in actual truth, which includes acknowledging what she does not understand. After Tessai left, Chiyo sat alone in the hall. She recognized the truth in his words. She had been so attached to her identity as a wise person that she could not admit ignorance. She had tried to maintain an image rather than be honest about her actual knowledge and limitations. This attachment had made her defensive, dishonest, and miserable. Over the following weeks, Chiyo practiced a new approach. When students asked questions she could not answer fully, she admitted it. "I do not know much about that tradition. Perhaps we can explore it together." Or, "That is beyond my expertise. Let me find someone who knows more about this topic." At first, these admissions felt painful, like losing part of herself. But gradually, something unexpected happened. She felt lighter, freer. She no longer had to defend an image of complete knowledge. She could be curious instead of defensive. She could learn from Daigo instead of resenting him. She could admit when she was confused instead of pretending certainty. Her students responded to this change positively. They found her more approachable, more human. They felt freer to admit their own confusion because their teacher could admit hers. The learning environment became more honest, less about performing knowledge and more about genuine exploration. One day, Chiyo and Daigo were discussing a difficult text together. Daigo offered an interpretation Chiyo had never considered. In the past, she might have felt threatened by this, but now she felt simple interest. "I have never thought of it that way," she said honestly. "Teach me about this perspective." As Daigo explained, Chiyo recognized something important. She was learning. She was growing. She was becoming someone slightly different than she had been. And this was not loss. This was being alive. The old identity, the fixed sense of being the wise one who already knew everything important, had been a cage. Releasing it allowed her to keep growing, keep learning, keep becoming. Years later, when Chiyo had become quite old, a young scholar asked her what she had learned in her long life of study. Chiyo smiled. "I have learned that the more I know, the more I see how much I do not know. I have learned that wisdom is not about having all the answers. It is about being comfortable with questions. I have learned that the worst thing a scholar can do is become attached to being seen as scholarly. This attachment prevents actual learning and creates suffering." She paused, then added, "I spent years defending an image of myself as someone who understood everything. This exhausted me and limited me. When I finally released that identity, when I could admit ignorance freely, I became a better teacher and a happier person. The fixed self is a burden. Letting it go is freedom." Chiyo's story shows us the suffering that comes from attachment to identity. She had built a sense of self around being knowledgeable and wise. When reality threatened this identity, she suffered not from lack of knowledge, but from her attachment to seeing herself a certain way. Her need to maintain her self-image made her defensive, dishonest, and unable to grow. Buddhism teaches that the self we think we are is not fixed or permanent. We create stories about ourselves and then defend these stories as if they were ultimate truth. But these stories are just mental constructions. They are not who we actually are in any permanent sense. We are constantly changing, constantly becoming, always more complex than any simple identity can capture. When we attach to a particular identity, we create several kinds of suffering. First, we must constantly defend that identity against anything that contradicts it. This is exhausting. Second, we cannot grow beyond that identity because growth would mean admitting we were not always what we claimed to be. Third, we cannot be fully honest because honesty might reveal aspects of ourselves that do not fit our chosen story. The practice of non-attachment to identity does not mean we have no sense of self or no roles in life. It means we hold our sense of self lightly. We can function as a teacher, a parent, a friend, without grasping at these roles as permanent fixed identities. We can acknowledge that we contain multitudes. Sometimes we are wise, sometimes foolish. Sometimes strong, sometimes weak. Sometimes kind, sometimes petty. This is being human, not failing to be some idealized version of ourselves. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle. In a region troubled by conflict, there once lived a warrior named Masaru who had served in the army since his youth. He had trained in combat, fought in battles, developed skills in strategy and martial arts. His entire life had been organized around being a warrior. His strength, his courage, his willingness to face danger, these qualities defined him. Masaru was good at what he did. He had earned respect through his skill and bravery. When people saw him, they saw a warrior. This was his identity, his value, his understanding of who he was. To be a warrior was not just what he did. It was who he was at the deepest level. But when Masaru reached his 40th year, the conflicts in his region ended. Treaties were signed. Armies were disbanded. Peace came suddenly after years of fighting. Masaru found himself released from military service, sent home with thanks for his service, but no longer needed. At first, Masaru felt relief. He was tired of fighting, tired of violence, tired of living with constant danger. He returned to his family's village and tried to settle into civilian life. But quickly, he began to feel lost. Without battles to fight, without enemies to face, without the structure of military life, he did not know who he was. His skills as a warrior had no use in peacetime. His strength was not needed for farming or trade. His courage, which had defined him in battle, had no outlet in village life. He would wake each morning and feel purposeless. If he was not a warrior, what was he? Who was he? Masaru tried to find roles in the village. He offered to teach young people defensive skills in case conflict returned. But parents did not want their children trained for war during peacetime. He offered to serve as a guard, but there was little need for guards in the peaceful village. His entire identity had been built around a function that no longer had a place. He began to feel bitter. He would sit and remember his days as a warrior, when he had been important, when his skills had mattered, when he had known exactly who he was. He felt the village did not appreciate him. He felt peace had made him irrelevant. He felt he had lost himself. Masaru's wife, Ayako, watched him grow more unhappy and withdrawn. One evening, she said gently, "You are suffering, but not from lack of work or purpose. You are suffering because you are clinging to an identity that no longer fits your life." "I am a warrior," Masaru said. "That is who I am. Without that, I am nothing." "Are you nothing?" Ayako asked. "Or are you a person who was a warrior and now has an opportunity to discover what else you might be?" Masaru felt anger rise. "I do not want to be something else. I want to be what I have always been." Ayako sat quietly for a moment, then said, "There is an old monk who lives in the temple on the hill. Perhaps you should speak with him. He was also a warrior once, many years ago." Masaru was surprised. He had seen the monk occasionally, but never knew he had been a warrior. The next day, curiosity drew him to the temple. He found the old monk, whose name was Renjo, working in a small garden. "I was told you were once a warrior," Masaru said without preamble. Renjo looked up, his weathered face calm. "Yes. Many years ago, in a different lifetime it seems now." "How did you stop being a warrior?" Masaru asked. "When the fighting ended, how did you know who you were?" Renjo set down his gardening tool and gestured for Masaru to sit. "I did not stop being a warrior easily," he said. "I suffered greatly when my military service ended. I felt exactly as you feel now. Lost. Purposeless. Empty. I thought being a warrior was who I was, and without that role, I had no self." He paused, looking at the plants he had been tending. I tried for years to hold on to my warrior identity. I would tell stories about battles I had fought. I would practice combat techniques alone, keeping my skills sharp for an enemy that no longer existed. I would feel superior to the peaceful villagers, thinking they did not understand what real life was like. But this clinging made me miserable. What changed? Masaru asked. I met a Zen teacher who asked me a simple question, Renjo said. He asked, "Before you became a warrior, who were you?" I said I had been a boy. He asked, "And before that?" I said a baby. He asked, "And before that?" I could not answer. He said, "You were nothing that could be named. And when you die, when even this body is gone, what will you be?" Again, I could not answer. Renjio looked directly at Masaru. The teacher showed me that warrior was just a role I played for a period of time. It was not my permanent nature. I was alive before I was a warrior. I would be alive after being a warrior. The clinging to that identity was creating my suffering. Not the loss of the role, but my insistence that the role was my true self. But without that identity, who am I? Masaru asked, his voice pained. You are who you are right now, Rengyo said simply. Not a fixed thing that can be captured in a word like warrior or monk or farmer. You are a living process, constantly becoming. You can be many things in one lifetime, many selves. This is not confusion. This is the natural flow of being alive. He returned to his gardening as he spoke. I became a monk, but I do not cling to being a monk the way I clung to being a warrior. I practice Zen. I tend this garden. I help people when they come with questions. But these are things I do, not a fixed identity I defend. Tomorrow I might do something else. I might be someone else. And that is fine. The freedom is in not grasping at any particular version of myself as the true permanent me. Masaru sat in silence, feeling these words work on something deep inside him. He had been fighting to preserve an identity that was already gone. The warrior version of himself had served its purpose and passed. But he had been trying to make it permanent, to keep being what he had been even though life had moved to a different phase. What should I do? Masaru asked, finally. Stop trying to be a warrior, Rengyo said. You were a warrior. That was real. But it is over. Now find out what this phase of life asks of you. Not by deciding what identity to take on next, but by responding to what is actually needed, what actually interests you, what actually calls to you. Be available to become something you have not imagined yet. Over the following months, Masaru practiced releasing his grip on his warrior identity. It was not easy. He would catch himself starting to say, I am a warrior, and have to stop. He would feel the urge to prove his strength or courage and have to ask himself why he needed to prove anything. Slowly, he began to notice what actually interested him in his current life. He enjoyed working with wood, crafting useful objects. He found satisfaction in helping neighbors with physical tasks they could not do themselves. He discovered he was good at mediating disputes, using strategic thinking in service of peace rather than war. None of these activities gave him the intense identity he had gotten from being a warrior. But together, they gave him a sense of engagement with life. He was useful. He was contributing. He was learning new skills. He was becoming someone different than he had been. One day, a young man from the village asked Masaru to teach him woodworking. As Masaru showed the young man how to select wood and use tools, he realized something had shifted. He was not teaching as a former warrior passing time. He was teaching as someone who enjoyed this craft and wanted to share it. This was real. This mattered. Not as much as being a warrior had mattered, perhaps, but in a quieter, more sustainable way. Years passed. Masaru became known in the village as a skilled craftsman and a wise advisor in conflicts. People no longer saw him as a former warrior. They saw him as who he was now. And Masaru himself stopped clinging to his old identity. He could remember his warrior years without needing to keep living in them. He could honor what he had been without demanding to still be that person. When Rengyo the monk died at a great age, Masaru attended the funeral. He felt gratitude to the old teacher who had shown him the way out of his suffering. As he stood before Rengyo's body, he thought about the teacher's words, "We are not fixed selves. We are living processes. We can be many things in one life." The freedom is in not grasping at any particular identity as the permanent truth of who we are. Masaru lived many more years, and in those years he became many things. A craftsman, a grandfather, an advisor, a gardener. None of these identities were who he truly was in any fixed sense. They were roles he played, functions he served, aspects of his constant becoming. And by holding them all lightly, by not grasping at any of them as his permanent self, he found a peace that had never been available when he was desperately clinging to being a warrior forever. Both Chiyo and Masaru struggled with the same attachment. Chiyo attached to her identity as a wise scholar. Masaru attached to his identity as a warrior. Both suffered when reality challenged these identities. Both found freedom only when they could release their grip on seeing themselves in fixed ways. The Buddha taught that attachment to self is one of the deepest sources of suffering. We create a story about who we are and then defend that story as if our life depends on it. We suffer when anything threatens our self-image. We cannot grow beyond our current identity because growth would mean admitting we are not who we said we were. But Zen Buddhism shows us that this fixed self we defend is an illusion. We are not one unchanging thing. We are constantly becoming, constantly changing, always more than any simple identity can capture. The scholar is also ignorant. The warrior is also peaceful. The wise person is also foolish. The strong person is also vulnerable. We contain multitudes, but our attachment to a single identity blinds us to this complexity. When we release attachment to identity, we do not lose ourselves. We discover a larger self, a more fluid and honest self, a self that can grow and change without feeling threatened. We can function in roles without being imprisoned by them. We can have qualities without grasping at them as permanent truths about us. The practice is noticing when we are defending an identity, when we cannot admit ignorance because we see ourselves as knowledgeable, when we cannot show vulnerability because we see ourselves as strong, when we cannot change because we have decided who we permanently are. In these moments, we can practice softening our grip, admitting that we are more complex than our story suggests, opening to becoming something we have not yet imagined. This is not about having no identity or pretending we have no qualities. It is about holding our sense of self lightly enough that we can be honest, can grow, can respond to what life actually asks of us rather than what our fixed identity permits. It is the freedom to be fully human, which means being many things, not all of them consistent, not all of them matching our preferred story about ourselves. Rest now. Notice your breath gently moving in and out. The Buddha taught that attachment in relationships causes some of our deepest suffering. We love people, which is natural and beautiful. But then we grasp at them. We try to keep them exactly as they are. We try to control how they change or whether they leave. We confuse loving someone with possessing them, and this confusion creates pain for everyone involved. In Buddhism, there is a teaching about loving kindness that wishes for others to be happy and free. Not happy in the way we think they should be happy. Not free to do only what we want them to do. But genuinely happy and genuinely free, even if their happiness and freedom take them away from us or lead them to become someone different than we prefer. This is hard to practice. We want the people we love to stay close, to remain familiar, to need us. When they change in ways we do not like, we feel betrayed. When they leave, we feel abandoned. When they make choices we would not make, we feel hurt. But often, our hurt comes not from what they are doing, but from our attachment to them being a certain way. The teaching asks us to examine the difference between loving and grasping, between caring for someone and trying to control them, between connection and possession. We can love deeply, care completely, be fully present for someone without demanding they stay the same forever or arranging their life to suit our needs. When we release attachment in relationships, we do not love less. We love more freely. We can appreciate people as they actually are, instead of comparing them to who we want them to be. We can let them grow and change without feeling threatened. We can allow them to leave when leaving is what they need, without making their departure about our worth or their betrayal. Let us explore a story that shows this truth. There once lived a woman named Nami who had a son named Kei. She had raised him carefully, given him everything she could, devoted herself to his well-being. From the time he was born, Kei had been the center of Nami's life. She had shaped her days around his needs, her choices around his welfare, her identity around being his mother. Nami loved her son deeply and genuinely. She wanted him to be happy, to thrive, to have a good life. But beneath this love was something else she did not fully recognize. A need for him to stay close. A need for him to need her. A need for him to remain the boy she had raised, the child who depended on her, the son who made her feel valuable and necessary. As Kei grew older, Nami began to feel anxious about his eventual independence. She would think about the day he would leave home and feel a pain in her chest. She told herself this was natural, that all mothers felt this way. But her anxiety began to shape how she related to him. When Kei talked about his dreams of traveling to study in a distant city, Nami would find reasons why this was impractical. The city was too far. The cost was too high. He was needed at home. She did not say directly that she wanted him to stay. She framed her resistance as concern for his welfare. But beneath every argument was her own fear of losing him. When Kei reached 18, he announced his decision to leave. He had been accepted to study at an academy 3 weeks' journey away. He was excited about the opportunity, about the chance to learn from new teachers, to see new places, to discover who he might become beyond the boundaries of his home village. Nami felt devastated. She tried to hide her feelings, tried to be supportive, but her pain was visible. She became quiet and withdrawn. She would look at Kay and feel grief, as if he were already gone, as if his leaving meant losing him forever. Kay noticed his mother's unhappiness and felt torn. He wanted to pursue his dreams, but he did not want to hurt her. He began to question his decision. Perhaps he should stay. Perhaps his mother needed him more than he needed to leave. Perhaps being a good son meant sacrificing his own path to keep her from suffering. A few days before Kay was scheduled to leave, Nami's older sister Tomoko came to visit. Tomoko had raised 4 children, all of whom had left home and built their own lives. She saw immediately what was happening. One afternoon while Kay was out, Tomoko spoke to Nami directly. "You are holding too tightly. You are making Kay's leaving about your loss instead of his growth. This is not love. This is attachment." Nami felt defensive. "I love my son. I want what is best for him." "Do you?" Tomoko asked gently. "Or do you want him to stay because you have built your identity around being needed by him? Because you fear who you will be when he is gone?" Nami felt tears forming. "He is my son, my only child. When he leaves, what will I have?" "You will have yourself," Tomoko said. "You will have your own life, which has been put on hold while you devoted everything to him. You will have the chance to discover who you are beyond being his mother. But you are so attached to that role, so fearful of releasing it, that you are trying to keep him small and close to serve your needs." She paused, then continued more softly. "Nami, Kay needs to leave. Not because he does not love you, but because leaving is part of growing. Your job as his mother is not to keep him with you forever. It is to help him become capable of living without you. If you truly love him, you will release him with blessing, not with guilt and sadness that makes him feel he is betraying you." Nami wanted to argue, but she recognized truth in her sister's words. She had been trying to keep Kay close, not for his sake, but for hers. She had confused her need for him with love for him. She had been grasping at him, trying to prevent the natural unfolding of his life because she feared her own emptiness. That evening, Nami sat alone and looked honestly at her feelings. She loved Kay, yes, but she was also attached to him in a way that was not healthy for either of them. She was attached to being needed, attached to her identity as his mother, attached to keeping her life organized around him so she did not have to face who she was without that role. The Buddha taught about this, she remembered suddenly, about how attachment creates suffering, how we grasp at people and try to keep them close, and this grasping hurts everyone. Love can be free. Love can release. But attachment holds tight and creates pain. Nami realized she had a choice. She could continue grasping, making Kay's departure painful for both of them, perhaps even preventing him from leaving freely. Or she could practice releasing. Not releasing her love for him, but releasing her attachment to keeping him close, to being needed, to remaining the center of his life. The next day, Nami asked Kay to sit with her. She could see tension in his face, worry about how she would react to his leaving. She took a breath and spoke from a more honest place than she had allowed herself before. "I have been making your leaving about me," she said. "About my fear and my loss and my needs. I have been holding you with guilt instead of releasing you with love. I am sorry." Kay looked surprised. "Mother, I do not want to hurt you." "You are not hurting me by leaving," Nami said, and as she spoke, she tried to believe it. "You are growing, which is what you should do. I am hurt because I have been attached to keeping you close, to being needed, to organizing my life around you. But this attachment is my problem, not your responsibility." She paused, feeling the difficulty of what she needed to say next. "I love you. I will miss you. But I want you to go. I want you to discover who you are beyond this village, beyond your role as my son. I want you to be free to become whoever you are meant to become. And I will work on discovering who I am beyond being your mother." Tears were streaming down both their faces now, but they were different tears than before. Not tears of guilt and grasping, but tears of honest love and difficult release. When Kay left a few days later, Nami felt pain. The house was empty. The silence was heavy. She missed him terribly. But beneath the natural sadness of separation was something else. Relief. She had released him. She had not made him carry the burden of her attachment. She had loved him enough to let him go. The months after Kay left were difficult for Nami. She had to discover who she was without organizing her entire life around him. She had to face the emptiness she had been avoiding by staying constantly busy with his needs. She had to learn to live for herself again. But slowly, something unexpected happened. Nami began to reclaim parts of herself she had set aside when Kay was born. She had once loved weaving, but had abandoned it to have more time for him. She returned to it now and found the old satisfaction still there. She had once had friends she spent time with, but those friendships had faded as she focused on being a mother. She renewed those connections and discovered they still held value. Kay would send letters occasionally, telling her about his studies, his new experiences, the person he was becoming. Nami would read these letters with genuine joy. She missed him, but she was not suffering from his absence the way she had feared. She had released her attachment to keeping him close, and in that release, she had freed both of them. When Kay returned home for a visit after a year away, something had changed between them. He was more confident, more himself. And Nami was more peaceful, less needy. They could be together without the weight of her grasping. They could enjoy each other's company without her fear of him leaving again. "You seem different, Mother," Kay said during the visit. "I am different," Nami agreed. "I have learned the difference between loving you and being attached to you. I still love you deeply. But I no longer need you to stay small or stay close to make me feel valuable. This has freed both of us." Kay smiled. "I can feel it. When I was leaving before, I felt guilty, like I was abandoning you. But you have shown me that leaving is not abandonment, that I can have my own life and still love you, that you can have your own life and still love me. We are connected, but not attached." Years later, when Kay had built his own life in the distant city, he would still visit his mother occasionally. Their relationship was warm and genuine, but it was not burdened by attachment. Nami had learned to hold her love for him with open hands, to appreciate his presence when he was near without demanding he stay, to continue her own life when he was away without feeling his absence as abandonment. This was love without grasping. connection without possession, and it had freed them both. Nami's story shows us the suffering that comes from attachment in our most intimate relationships. She loved her son genuinely, but she confused love with needing to keep him close. Her attachment made his natural growth feel like betrayal. Her grasping created guilt that would have harmed both of them if she had not recognized what she was doing and chosen differently. Zen Buddhism teaches that we can love without clinging. That connection does not require possession. That caring for someone does not mean controlling their choices or demanding they stay forever. We can be deeply devoted to people while also releasing them to be who they are, to grow how they need to grow, to leave when leaving is what they need. This applies to every kind of relationship. Parents and children, yes, but also partners, friends, anyone we care about. When we grasp at people, when we try to keep them exactly as they are, when we make their choices about our needs, we create suffering. Not just for ourselves, but for them. They feel our attachment as pressure, as demand, as a burden they must carry. When we release attachment, when we practice loving with open hands, relationships become lighter and more honest. People can be themselves without fear of disappointing us. They can grow and change without feeling they are betraying us. They can leave when leaving is necessary without destroying the connection between us. This does not mean we do not feel sadness when people change or leave. Sadness is natural. Loss is painful. But we can feel these things without the additional suffering that comes from grasping, from demanding people stay the same, from making their natural unfolding into a personal rejection. Let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle. In a fishing village by the sea, there lived two men who had been friends since childhood. Jiro and Shin had grown up together, learned to fish together, spent countless hours in each other's company. Their friendship was deep and comfortable. They knew each other completely. They could speak without words, understand each other without explanation. Jiro valued this friendship immensely. Shin was not just a friend. He was like family, like a brother. Jiro organized much of his life around their friendship. They fished together most days. They ate meals together. They spent evenings talking and laughing. Jiro could not imagine his life without Shin in it. But as they reached their middle years, something began to change. Shin started spending time with a woman named Yuri, who had recently moved to the village. At first, Jiro thought little of it. Shin had had relationships before that had not lasted. But this time seemed different. Shin spoke about Yuri with a warmth and seriousness that Jiro had not heard before. Jiro began to feel something he did not want to name. Jealousy. Resentment. When Shin would decline to fish because he was spending time with Yuri, Jiro felt hurt. When Shin would talk about Yuri with obvious happiness, Jiro felt a tightness in his chest. He tried to hide these feelings, but they grew stronger. One evening, Shin told Jiro that he and Yuri were planning to marry. Jiro forced a smile and offered congratulations, but inside he felt something like grief. This meant everything would change. Shin would have new priorities. Their friendship would become secondary to his marriage. Jiro would lose the companion who had been central to his life. After the wedding, Jiro's fears proved accurate. Shin was still friendly, but he had less time. He would go home to Yuri instead of spending evenings with Jiro. He would make plans with his wife before checking if Jiro needed help with anything. The easy, constant companionship they had shared for decades was gone. Jiro felt abandoned. He would see Shin and Yuri together, laughing, clearly happy, and feel left behind. He tried to be understanding, tried to accept the change, but beneath his forced acceptance was bitterness. He had given so much to their friendship. How could Shin just shift his attention to someone else? How could he make Jiro so unimportant so easily? One day, Shin came to Jiro looking troubled. "You have been different since I married," Shin said directly. "Distant. Cold. Have I done something to hurt you?" Jiro wanted to deny it, but he was too tired of pretending. "You have moved on," he said, his voice harder than he intended. "You have a wife now. I am no longer important to you." Shin looked pained. "That is not true. You are still my closest friend. But yes, I have a wife now. My life has expanded to include her. That does not mean you are unimportant. It means my life is larger than it was." "It feels like I have been replaced," Jiro said. "Replaced?" Shin repeated. "Or are you upset that I am not available to you in exactly the way I used to be? That my life is not organized entirely around our friendship anymore?" Jiro felt anger flash. "We were friends for 40 years. Does that mean nothing?" "It means everything," Shin said. "But Jiro, you are treating our friendship like a possession. Like I owe you a certain amount of time and attention. Like I am betraying you by loving my wife. This is not friendship. This is attachment." Jiro wanted to argue, but Shin's words had struck something true. He had been treating Shin like someone who belonged to him. Someone whose life should remain organized around their friendship. He had been grasping at keeping things exactly as they had always been, and when Shin naturally grew and changed and made room for new love, Jiro had experienced it as loss and betrayal. "I do not know how to be your friend if we are not together all the time," Jiro admitted quietly. "Then you must learn," Shin said, not unkindly. "Because I am changing. My life is different now. I still value our friendship, but it cannot be what it was. And if you cannot accept that, if you can only be my friend when I give you exactly what you want, then perhaps we do not have the friendship I thought we had." After Shin left, Jiro sat alone feeling miserable. He recognized that Shin was right. He had been clinging to their friendship as it used to be, refusing to allow it to evolve. He had been demanding that Shin remain available to him in specific ways. He had been making Shin's marriage about his own loss instead of Shin's happiness. This was attachment. Not love, but grasping. Not caring for Shin, but needing Shin to stay the same to avoid Jiro's own discomfort with change. Jiro thought about what the Buddha taught about attachment in relationships. That we suffer when we try to hold people in place. When we demand, they remain as they were. When we cannot accept their natural growth and change. Real friendship, real love, allows people to evolve. Celebrates their happiness even when it changes the relationship. Over the following weeks, Jiro practiced releasing his attachment. When he felt the urge to resent Yuri, he reminded himself that she was not his enemy. She had not stolen Shin. She had simply joined his life, and this was good for him. When he felt hurt that Shin was less available, he reminded himself that friendship does not require constant physical presence. that people can care about each other while having separate lives. He began to build his own life more fully instead of organizing everything around Shin's availability. He spent time with other people. He took up activities he had been neglecting. He discovered that he had been too dependent on one friendship, too attached to it remaining exactly as it had always been. One day, Jiro invited Shin and Yuri to share a meal together. It was the first time he had done this genuinely, without resentment. As they ate and talked, Jiro could see how happy Shin was, how his marriage had brought out new aspects of his personality, how he was growing in ways he could not have grown if his life had remained unchanged. Jiro felt genuine happiness for his friend. Not the forced smile he had given at the wedding, but real joy. And beneath that joy was relief. He had released his grip. He had stopped demanding that Shin be available to him in specific ways. He had accepted that their friendship was evolving and evolution was not betrayal. After that evening, Shin said to Jiro, "Thank you for letting me have both, my marriage and our friendship. For a while, I felt I had to choose, that you were punishing me for growing. But tonight felt like the old comfort between us, just in a new form." "I was attached to how things were," Jiro admitted. "I could not accept change. But I have learned that holding too tightly destroys what we are trying to keep. You are still my friend, just in a different way now. And that is enough. That is good." Years later, Jiro would tell younger people who came to him with relationship troubles, "Friendship requires allowing people to be who they are, to change, to have other connections. If you can only care for someone when they give you exactly what you want, that is not love. That is attachment. Real love opens its hands. It allows people to grow. It remains even when the form of the relationship changes." Both Nami and Jiro learned the same truth about attachment in relationships. Nami attached to keeping her son close and dependent. Jiro attached to keeping his friendship unchanged. Both created suffering by grasping at people and demanding they remain the same. Both found freedom only when they could release their grip and allow natural change. The Buddha taught that attachment in relationships is often disguised as love. We think we are caring for people when we are actually trying to control them. We think we are protecting relationships when we are actually preventing them from evolving. We think we are being loyal when we are actually being possessive. Real love, genuine care, holds people with open hands. It appreciates them as they are, without demanding they stay that way forever. It allows them to grow, to change, to form new connections, to leave when leaving is what they need. It does not make their choices about our needs or their changes about our loss. This kind of love is harder than grasping. It requires releasing our need to control. It requires facing our own insecurity when people we love become less available or change in ways we did not choose. It requires trusting that connection can survive change, that love does not depend on possession. But this kind of love is also freer. It does not burden others with our demands. It does not create guilt when people need to grow or leave. It allows relationships to breathe, to evolve, to be alive rather than frozen. And paradoxically, by releasing our grip, we often keep deeper connection than we ever could through grasping. The practice is noticing when we are attached in relationships. When we are hurt by someone's natural growth because it means less attention for us, when we resent their new connections because we feel replaced, when we make them feel guilty for having lives beyond us. In these moments, we can ask ourselves, am I loving this person or grasping at them? Am I caring for their well-being or demanding they serve my needs? When we find attachment, we can practice releasing. Not releasing the person or the relationship, but releasing our tight grip on how it must be. Opening to what the relationship is becoming instead of insisting it stay what it was. Trusting that love that allows freedom is stronger than love that demands possession. This is one of the hardest practices in Buddhism. To love deeply while not grasping. To care completely while not controlling. To remain connected while allowing separation. But it is also one of the most liberating. When we can do this, when we can hold people with open hands, we free them and ourselves from the suffering that attachment creates. Rest now. Notice your body settling into whatever supports you. In Zen Buddhism, there is a famous saying, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." This points to something we all experience. The more convinced we are that we are right, the less able we are to see clearly. The tighter we hold our opinions and positions, the more closed we become to learning, to changing, to discovering we might be wrong. We attach to being right. We build positions and then defend them as if our life depends on it. We argue not to discover truth, but to prove we already possess it. We listen to others not to understand them, but to find flaws in their thinking. We interpret new information through the lens of what we already believe, dismissing anything that contradicts our established views. This attachment to being right creates suffering in several ways. It closes us off from growth and learning. It damages relationships as we prioritize winning arguments over understanding people. It keeps us trapped in views that may no longer serve us. And it creates constant tension as we must continually defend our positions against anything that challenges them. The Buddha taught that we should hold our views lightly. Not that we should have no opinions or convictions, but that we should remain open to being wrong. Open to discovering that the truth is more complex than we thought. Open to learning from people who see things differently. This openness is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the humility to recognize that our perspective is limited and reality is vast. When we release attachment to being right, we do not become wishy-washy or unprincipled. We become more genuinely interested in truth than in defending our ego. We can have strong convictions while remaining willing to adjust them when presented with new understanding. We can disagree with people without needing to prove they are wrong and we are right. We can change our minds without feeling we have failed. Let us explore a story that reveals this truth. There once lived two men in a village surrounded by rice fields and orchards. Their names were Kaito and Hideaki, and they had been neighbors for over 20 years. Both were respected in the community. Both were considered reasonable and thoughtful. But they had one problem that had grown over the years into something that poisoned much of their peace. They disagreed about a boundary between their properties. The disagreement had started small. A fence between their lands had rotted and needed replacing. When they went to rebuild it, they discovered they had different understandings of exactly where the boundary should be. The difference was not large, perhaps 3 feet at most. But each man was convinced he was right. Kaito believed the boundary ran along a line of old stones that had been there since before either of them owned the land. He had documents that he interpreted as supporting this view. He had asked elder villagers who remembered the properties from decades past. Everything confirmed in his mind that he was correct. Hideaki believed the boundary ran along a different line marked by the root system of an ancient tree. He too had documents that he believed proved his position. He had his own conversations with people who remembered things differently than the people Kaito had spoken with. In his mind, the evidence clearly showed he was right. Neither man would compromise. To compromise would mean admitting they might be wrong. And both had invested so much in being right, had built such firm positions, that changing now felt impossible. The fence remained unbuilt. The boundary remained disputed. And the disagreement infected everything between them. They stopped speaking to each other except about the boundary dispute. They could not be friendly because the unresolved disagreement sat between them like a wall. They would see each other and feel anger rise. Each interpreted the other's stubbornness as unreasonable, as evidence of bad character. How could Hideaki be so blind to the obvious truth? How could Kaito ignore such clear evidence? The dispute affected more than just the two men. Their families felt the tension. Village gatherings became uncomfortable when both were present. People began avoiding topics that might relate to property or boundaries for fear of triggering another argument. The community that had been harmonious now had a crack running through it, and the crack was widening. Years passed. 5 years. 10 years. The fence was never built. The boundary remained disputed. Both men remained utterly convinced they were right. Both suffered from the ongoing conflict, but neither could release their position. To back down, to admit they might be wrong, felt like losing everything. One spring, a traveling Zen monk named Eishin came through the village. He stayed at the small temple and offered teachings to anyone who wished to listen. Both Kaito and Hideaki attended, sitting on opposite sides of the room, careful not to acknowledge each other. Eishin spoke about attachment, about how we cling to things, to people, to ideas, and how this clinging creates suffering. He spoke specifically about attachment to being right, about how we build positions and then imprison ourselves inside them, about how we stop seeking truth and start defending ego. After the teaching, both Kaito and Hideaki separately approached the monk to tell him about their dispute. Each wanted the monk to confirm that they were right and the other was wrong. Each presented their evidence, their arguments, their certainty. Eishin listened to both men carefully. Then he said something neither expected. "You are both suffering greatly from this dispute. But the suffering does not come from where the boundary actually is. It comes from your attachment to being right about where it is." "But one of us is right and one is wrong," Kaito protested. "The boundary is in a specific place. It is not a matter of opinion." "Perhaps," Eishin said. "But tell me, what have you gained from being right? If you are indeed correct about the boundary, what has this correctness brought you?" Kaito thought about this. "I have gained nothing. I have lost a neighbor, lost peace, spent 10 years in conflict. But I cannot simply give up being right." "Why not?" Eishin asked simply. "Because it is mine," Kaito said. "The land is mine. The truth is on my side." Eishin turned to Hideaki, who had been listening. "And you? What has being right given you?" Hideaki had to admit the same thing. nothing but suffering. But I too cannot give up my position. I know I am right. How can I pretend otherwise? No one is asking you to pretend, Aishin said. But consider this. You have both held your positions for 10 years. In that time, have you once genuinely considered that you might be wrong? Have you once truly listened to the other's perspective with openness? Or have you only looked for ways to prove you are right and he is wrong? Both men were silent. They had to admit they had only defended their positions, never genuinely questioned them. This is attachment to being right, Aishin said. You have stopped caring about truth. You only care about being proven correct. You have made your positions into your identities. To be wrong would feel like losing yourself. So you choose ongoing suffering over the possibility of being mistaken. He paused, then continued. In Zen, we practice not knowing. We remain open to being wrong. We hold our views lightly enough that we can adjust them when we see more clearly. This does not mean we have no convictions. It means we are more devoted to truth than to defending our ego. But what if I am right? Kaito asked. Should I just give up what is mine? I am not telling you what to do about the boundary, Aishin said. I am pointing to your suffering and its cause. The boundary is where it is, regardless of what either of you believes. But you are both suffering terribly from your attachment to your beliefs. This suffering is optional. The boundary dispute is a fact. Your attachment to being right about it is a choice. After the monk left the village, his words remained with both men. Kaito found himself lying awake at night, thinking about what Aishin had said. He had been so certain he was right. But what had this certainty cost him? He had lost a friendship. He had lived in anger for 10 years. He had made himself and others miserable. And for what? For 3 feet of land and the satisfaction of being proven right? He thought about the evidence he had gathered. He had interpreted everything to support his position. But had he truly looked at it objectively? Or had he only seen what he wanted to see? He did not know anymore. The years of defending his position had made him unable to see clearly. Hideaki was having similar thoughts. He too had been absolutely certain. But Aishin's question haunted him. What had being right brought him? Nothing but misery. He had sacrificed friendship, peace, and years of his life to defend a position. And now he could not even be sure his position was correct. He had just been too attached to it to admit any doubt. One morning, Kaito went to Hideaki's house. It was the first time he had approached his neighbor with anything other than argument in over a decade. Hideaki opened the door, surprised. I have been thinking about what the monk said, Kaito began. I have been attached to being right. I have suffered from this attachment, and I have made you suffer. I do not know anymore where the boundary should be. I thought I knew, but perhaps I have only been defending my position, not seeking truth. Hideaki felt something release in his chest. I too have been thinking. I have also been attached. I have also chosen being right over being at peace. I do not want to continue this way. They sat together, perhaps for the first time in 10 years without the weight of their dispute between them. They talked honestly. Not about who was right, but about how their attachment to being right had damaged them both. What should we do about the fence? Hideaki finally asked. "I do not know," Kaito said. "But I think we should start by admitting we both might be wrong. Neither of us knows with certainty where the boundary is. We have only convinced ourselves we know." They decided to hire a surveyor from another region, someone with no connection to the village, to measure the properties with proper instruments and determine the boundary according to the official records. Both agreed they would accept whatever the surveyor determined, even if it contradicted their positions. When the surveyor completed his work, he showed them where the boundary should be according to the legal documents and precise measurements. The line ran between where Kaito had insisted it was and where Hideaki had claimed it was. Both men had been partially right and partially wrong. They built the fence together along the surveyor's line. As they worked side by side for the first time in a decade, they talked about the years of conflict, about how their attachment to being right had stolen their friendship and their peace, about how neither of them had actually been completely correct, despite their absolute certainty. "We were both wrong to be so sure we were right," Kaito said as they finished the fence. "Yes," Hideaki agreed. "We were wrong about where the boundary was, but more importantly, we were wrong to hold our positions so tightly that we could not be neighbors, could not be friends, could not be at peace." After the fence was built, their relationship slowly healed. They were not as close as they had been before the dispute, but they were friendly. They could speak with each other, help each other, share the community together. And both had learned something valuable. That attachment to being right creates suffering. That holding positions too tightly makes us blind. That being willing to be wrong is sometimes wiser than insisting we are right. Years later, when younger people in the village would have disputes, the story of Kaito and Hideaki would be told as a warning. About how two good men had wasted a decade of their lives and damaged a friendship over attachment to being right. About how certainty can be more dangerous than doubt. About how releasing the need to be proven correct can bring more peace than winning any argument. The story of Kaito and Hideaki shows us clearly the suffering that comes from attachment to being right. Both men were intelligent and reasonable. Both had evidence for their positions. Both might have had legitimate claims. But their attachment to their positions, their inability to consider they might be wrong, their need to be proven right, created years of unnecessary suffering. The Buddha taught that we should hold our views lightly. This does not mean having no convictions or principles. It means remaining open to learning, to adjusting our understanding, to discovering that reality is more complex than our current view captures. It means being more devoted to truth than to defending our ego. When we attach to being right, we stop learning. We interpret everything through the lens of our established position. We dismiss evidence that contradicts us. We listen to others only to find flaws in their thinking. We become closed, rigid, unable to grow. Our need to be right imprisons us. In Zen practice, there is an emphasis on beginner's mind, on approaching each situation with openness without assuming we already know. The beginner is willing to be wrong, willing to learn, willing to see things freshly. The expert, convinced they already understand, often cannot see what is actually in front of them. This teaching applies to all kinds of positions and beliefs. Political views, religious convictions, interpretations of events, judgments about people, opinions about what should happen. Whenever we grasp too tightly to being right, we create suffering for ourselves and often for others. let us explore another story that shows this truth from a different angle. In a town known for its craftspeople, there lived a calligrapher named Osamu who had studied his art for over 30 years. He had learned from a traditional master, practiced the classical forms, developed a style that was precise, elegant, and perfectly in line with centuries of tradition. His work was respected and sought after. Osamu took pride in his knowledge of proper calligraphy. He could identify which historical school a piece came from just by looking at the brushwork. He could explain the rules that governed correct character formation. He could distinguish authentic traditional work from modern variations that departed from proper form. But this knowledge had hardened into rigidity. Osamu had very firm opinions about what was correct calligraphy and what was not. Work that followed traditional forms was good. Work that deviated from those forms was bad, regardless of any other qualities it might possess. To Osamu, there was a right way to do calligraphy, and he knew what it was. When younger calligraphers in the town began experimenting with new styles, Osamu was openly critical. They were ruining the art form, he said. They did not understand the principles. They were chasing novelty instead of respecting tradition. Their work might be interesting to ignorant people who did not know better, but anyone with proper training could see it was wrong. One of these younger calligraphers was a woman named Eri, who had studied traditional forms but was now exploring more expressive, less constrained approaches. Her characters would sometimes break the rules Osamu held sacred. She would vary pressure and speed in ways that created unusual effects. She would position text on the page in unexpected ways. Her work was gaining attention and admirers. This bothered Osamu greatly. How could people admire work that violated the principles? How could Eri, who had been trained properly, abandon what she had learned? He felt personally offended, as if her experimental work was an attack on everything he believed about calligraphy. One day, a wealthy patron commissioned a piece for a new building and could not decide whether to hire Osamu or Eri. The patron asked both of them to create sample pieces so he could choose. Osamu created a beautiful work in classical style, precisely executed, following every rule perfectly. Eri created something more dynamic, with characters that seemed to move across the page, breaking traditional placement while maintaining a kind of energetic harmony. The patron chose Eri's piece. When Osamu heard this, he felt both angry and vindicated. Of course, the patron had chosen poorly. The patron did not understand true calligraphy. He had been seduced by novelty. This proved that people could no longer distinguish quality from mere innovation. Osamu made his opinions known throughout the town. Eri's work was not real calligraphy. People who admired it lacked proper training. The art form was being degraded by those who did not respect tradition. He became known for his criticism, his rigid standards, his inability to appreciate anything that did not conform to his understanding of correctness. One evening, an old teacher named Fumihiko came to visit Osamu. Fumihiko had once been Osamu's teacher's teacher, a master of the classical tradition who was now very old but still respected. Osamu was honored by the visit and eager to share his concerns about the decline of proper calligraphy. But Fumihiko had not come to agree with Osamu. He had come to teach him something. "I have been hearing about your criticisms," Fumihiko said. "You speak often about correct and incorrect calligraphy, about right and wrong forms. Tell me, when did you stop being interested in beauty and become only interested in rules?" Osamu was taken aback. I defend the traditional forms because they are correct. They are what centuries of masters have refined. To abandon them is to lose the art itself. Is it? Fumihiko asked. Or is it to allow the art to continue growing? Everything in our tradition was once new. Every form we now call classical was once an innovation that departed from what came before. The masters you revere were not afraid to explore, to adjust, to discover new possibilities within the art. You claim to honor them by rigidly preserving their forms, but you dishonor them by refusing to do what they did, which was to remain alive and responsive to their own time. He paused, looking at some of Osamu's work displayed on the wall. Your work is technically perfect, but it lacks something. It lacks the vitality that comes from genuine discovery. You are copying forms, not creating from living understanding. You have become so attached to being right, to following rules, that you have stopped truly practicing your art. Osamu felt defensive. So you think Eri's work is superior to mine? I did not say that, Fumihiko replied. I said your attachment to being right has made you rigid. Whether Eri's specific experiments succeed or fail is not the point. The point is that she is exploring, questioning, remaining open. You are defending, judging, remaining closed. Her work may not be better than yours, but her approach to practice is more alive. But there are standards, Osamu protested. There is correct and incorrect form. There are principles, Fumihiko agreed. But principles are not the same as rigid rules. A principle is alive. It can be applied in many ways. A rule is dead. It can only be followed or broken. You have turned living principles into dead rules and then attached yourself to those rules as if they were ultimate truth. After Fumihiko left, Osamu sat alone with these challenging words. He looked at his own work with new eyes. It was correct. Every stroke followed proper form. But was it alive? Was it expressing anything genuine? Or was it just proving he knew the rules? He thought about his constant criticism of others, his need to judge work as right or wrong, his inability to appreciate anything that did not fit his narrow understanding of correctness. He recognized that this came from attachment, from his need to be right, from his identity being built around knowing the correct way and defending it against all deviation. The Buddha taught about this, about how attachment to views creates suffering, about how we should hold our opinions lightly. Osamu had not held his opinions lightly. He had grasped them so tightly that they had become a prison. He could not see beauty unless it conformed to his rules. He could not appreciate innovation because it threatened his certainty. He had stopped being an artist and become a defender of dogma. Over the following weeks, Osamu practiced a different approach. He visited Eri's studio and asked if he could watch her work. This was difficult. It meant admitting he might have something to learn from someone he had criticized. But he forced himself to be open. As he watched Eri work, he began to see something he had missed. Yes, she broke rules, but she broke them from understanding, not ignorance. She knew the traditional forms and chose to depart from them for specific effects. Her work had intention and skill, just expressed differently than his own. I have been harsh in my judgment of your work, Osamu admitted. I have been attached to my view of correct calligraphy. I have been closed when I should have been open. Eri was surprised by this admission. Your criticism stung, she said honestly. You are respected. When you said my work was not real calligraphy, others listened. I doubted myself. I was wrong to speak so certainly, Osamu said. I know classical forms well. But I do not know everything about calligraphy. I do not know what it might become. My attachment to being right made me blind and cruel. They talked for a long time about calligraphy, about tradition and innovation, about rules and principles. Osamu did not adopt Airi's style. He still worked in classical forms. But he released his rigid judgment. He could appreciate work that was different from his own. He could admit that correctness was more complex than he had believed. He could hold his views as one perspective among many rather than as absolute truth. Osamu's work changed after this. Not in form, which remained classical, but in quality. There was something more alive in it. He was no longer just following rules. He was expressing something through the forms. His attachment to being right had made his work dead. Releasing that attachment allowed his work to breathe. When people asked Osamu about the change they sensed in him, he would say, I was so certain I was right that I stopped truly seeing. I judged everything according to my fixed views. I could not learn because I thought I already knew everything important. Releasing my need to be right has made me a student again. And being a student, being open, is more valuable than being an expert who cannot see anything new. Both stories show us the same truth about attachment to being right. Kaito and Hideaki attached to their positions about a boundary and suffered for years. Osamu attached to his views about correct calligraphy and became rigid and blind. All of them had to release their tight grip on being right before they could find peace or growth. The teaching here is not that we should have no opinions or beliefs. We need working theories about how things are. We need to be able to make judgments and decisions. The problem comes when we grasp these views so tightly that we cannot adjust them, cannot learn, cannot admit when we are wrong. Buddhism encourages holding views lightly, having strong convictions while remaining willing to revise them, being committed to truth more than to defending our ego, listening to perspectives different from our own with genuine openness rather than just looking for flaws. Recognizing that our view is always limited and reality is always larger than our understanding of it. When we attach to being right, we create several kinds of suffering. We damage relationships by prioritizing winning arguments over understanding people. We stop growing because we think we already know. We become defensive and rigid because any challenge to our views feels like an attack on our identity. We live in constant tension as we must defend our positions against anything that contradicts them. When we release this attachment, we do not become passive or unprincipled. We become more genuinely curious, more able to learn, more capable of genuine dialogue with people who see things differently, more flexible in responding to new information, more peaceful because we are not constantly defending our ego. The practice is noticing when we are attached to being right, when we are listening to others only to find flaws in their arguments, when we interpret all evidence to support our existing views, when we feel threatened by perspectives that differ from ours, when we cannot say the words "I might be wrong" or "I do not know." In these moments, we can recognize attachment and practice releasing it slightly. This does not mean abandoning our views. It means holding them more lightly, being willing to be wrong, remaining open to learning, choosing peace and growth over the satisfaction of being proven right. This is wisdom. This is freedom. This is how we continue evolving instead of becoming frozen in rigid certainty. Rest now. Notice your breath moving in and out. No need to hold any position, defend any view, or prove anything. Just this moment, just this breath, just this peaceful rest. As we come to the end of our exploration tonight, take a moment to simply be where you are. Feel your body resting. Notice your breath moving gently in and out. Everything you have been holding can be held a little more lightly now. Tonight we have journeyed through the teaching of non-attachment from many angles. We saw how grasping at outcomes creates suffering even when our efforts are genuine. How clinging to possessions weighs us down. How attachment in relationships turns love into possession. How defending our need to be right closes us to growth and damages connection. We discovered that non-attachment is not about caring less, but about holding everything with open hands instead of clenched fists. This teaching is one of the essential practices in Zen and Buddhism. When we grasp at things, at people, at outcomes, at being right, we create suffering for ourselves and others. But when we can release our grip, when we can give our best while letting go of results, when we can love without possessing, when we can hold our views lightly, we discover a freedom that comes not from having everything go our way, but from releasing our demand that it must. You do not need to remember everything you heard tonight. The seeds have been planted. They will continue working in you in their own time. You may find yourself tomorrow noticing where you are grasping or feeling lighter when you release your grip on something you have been holding too tightly, or discovering that you can care deeply while holding more gently. In our next episode, we will explore ordinary mind, the recognition that the sacred and the profound are found not in special experiences, but in simple daily life lived with presence and care. For now, let yourself rest completely. Let the day release its hold. Let your thoughts settle like leaves falling to the ground. You can open your hands. You can release your grip. And in this moment, you can simply be. Sleep well, and thank you for joining us here at Sleepy Monk.